Welcome, curious listener, to The Deep Dive, brought to you by Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. Today, we're plunging into, well, a pretty profound question. What if everything we thought we knew about conflict and peace is just too simple?
Right. What if resolving conflict means we have to dig much, much deeper than we usually do?
Exactly. Beyond the headlines, into those hidden forces that really fuel global disputes. So our mission for this deep dive is to sort of pull out the key insights from a really fascinating stack of sources. We'll look at Johan Galtung, the pioneer of peace studies, and also perspectives on things like resentment and collective memory in international relations, plus the practical tools of different diplomatic tracks.
It should give us some real aha moments, I think. Ways to reframe how we look at global events.
Definitely. And by the way, if you find this interesting and want to support what we do, maybe get access to some extra deep dives, you can subscribe to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. Just a small monthly fee.
Yeah, and what's really illuminating, I find, is how these different ideas, grand theories, raw emotions like resentment, they actually weave together. It gives you a much fuller picture of why conflicts stick around and maybe, just maybe, how we can genuinely move past them. Galtung's work especially gives us this framework that really stretches our usual understanding of what peace even means.
Okay, let's start there then. Johan Galtung. He's often called the founding father of peace studies. I mean, the output is staggering, over 150 books, more than 1,000 articles.
It's incredible.
Really begs the question, how did one person manage to shape our understanding of peace and conflict so profoundly?
Well, Galtung brought this really unique perspective, almost like a medical lens, to looking at conflict. What was truly revolutionary, I think, was his diagnosis prognosis therapy framework, DPT, he called it.
Okay, DPT,
Yeah.
like a doctor.
Exactly like a doctor. First, you diagnose the root causes, what he termed the social or political wounds. Then you prognose, basically predict how things might unfold if you don't intervene. And finally, you propose a therapy, a real, concrete solution. It forces you to go beyond just, patching things up.
So not just treating the symptoms.
Right. Imagine a doctor just putting a bandage on a bullet wound but ignoring the internal bleeding or the infection. That's often how international relations works, isn't it? Galtung insists we find the actual social illness, not just the obvious signs. It's a totally different way to think about intervention. And apparently this was heavily influenced by his father, who was a physician.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, his father taught him that peace isn't just the absence of illness, like the absence of war, but it's this continuous process of repair. Always mending.
That's a powerful idea.
What?
But okay, it still sounds a bit theoretical. How does Galtung take this medical lens and apply it to actual, messy, real-world violence? Does he just categorize it, or does it change how we might step in?
He does both, and that's really the brilliance of it. He identified 3 forms of violence, and crucially, he stressed how they're all interconnected, they feed each other. He used that famous iceberg analogy.
The iceberg, right.
I've heard of that. So first, there's direct violence. That's the obvious stuff, the tip of the iceberg. Physical acts, killing, assault, war. What we usually see and think of as violence.
Okay, the visible part.
Exactly. But beneath the surface, hidden away, are the deeper roots. There's structural violence. This is the invisible kind. It lives in the systems, the inequalities that stop people meeting basic needs. It's often perpetuated by just neglect, not necessarily someone deliberately trying to cause harm. Think of political systems that deny freedom, like frozen autocracies, or economic systems where people die daily from lack of food or medicine. That's structural violence.
Wow, okay, so it's built into the system.
Precisely. And then also invisible is cultural violence. This is about the societal norms, the beliefs, the ideologies that actually make direct and structural violence seem acceptable or even normal. It fosters emotions like anger, fear, hatred. It spreads misunderstandings. You could almost think of cultural violence as the software running the hardware of structural inequality, and it kind of normalizes the direct violence, the tip of the iceberg.
So the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs.
Exactly. The beliefs that make it okay to harm others or just ignore their suffering. It's violence woven into our understanding. And the critical point is that structural and cultural violence are the roots of hidden conflicts. They only really become visible when they erupt as direct violence.
Right, that iceberg model really paints a picture. So Galtung shows us these invisible structures and beliefs causing harm. But these aren't just abstract concepts, are they? They must connect to real human feelings, the emotions that make conflicts last so long. How does that human element fit in?
You've hit on something absolutely crucial there. And that leads us straight into the idea of resentment in international relations. It's described as this really powerful emotional attitude, a kind of smoldering sentiment. It's maybe weaker than pure hatred or outright anger, but it's far more durable, it lasts longer.
Smoldering, like it just sits there.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes from perceiving that another group, another nation perhaps, enjoys an undeserved status position. Basically, you feel they have high status or power they don't morally deserve. It's subtle, but it's this persistent animosity, like a slow-burning grudge that can fester for generations.
So it's not just a quick flash of anger, but this deep, slow burn grudge. What's the real danger of that for, international stability?
Well, the danger is precisely because it lasts so long and it's often hidden. Resentment acts as an emotional stabilizer of negative prejudices. It connects those short-term bursts of anger to long-term national attitudes. You see examples like anti-Americanism in China, France, Russia, and some Arab countries, or within the EU, that Southern resentment against solvent EU members like Germany, often fueled by arguments over austerity policies. The key ingredients seem to be a perceived injustice and also an awareness of momentary impotence, feeling like you can't actually do anything right now to fix the perceived wrong.
So you feel wrong, but powerless to fix it.
Right. So the feeling just lingers, maybe even gets stronger over time. It's like the silent acid eating away at relationships and alliances. It really helps explain why some conflicts just seem impossible to resolve.
This sounds like it links straight into the attitudes part of Galtung's ABC triangle, those negative feelings fueling the conflict. But wait, what about memory? We're always told we must remember the past, right, to avoid repeating it. But could remembering actually get in the way of peace sometimes?
It sounds totally counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's exactly where we bump into this provocative idea of the cult of memory. While remembering is often framed as this moral duty, some of the sources we looked at suggest that too much remembering can actually be more dangerous than forgetting.
Really? More
Yeah.
dangerous?
Yeah. The argument is that collective historical memory, the way it's actually used by groups and nations, has led far too often to war rather than peace, to rancor and resentment rather than reconciliation. And often it leads to this determination to exact revenge. Think about the Bosnian War in the 90s. So much of that was fueled by dredging up centuries-old historical grievances, these sores of history that hadn't healed. Or look at the dynamics in Israel-Palestine today. Historical narratives are incredibly powerful and often make current events feel like just the latest chapter in an ancient struggle.
And memory can be twisted too, right?
Absolutely manipulated. Think about how historical figures like Joan of Arc in France or William Wallace in Scotland get used by different political groups. Their memory is shaped to build national unity, sure, but also sometimes antagonism towards others. History gets distorted. This cult of memory can even turn a wound into a weapon. We see extremist groups using terms like crusade to stir up hatred, deliberately distorting history to link today's conflicts to struggles from 1,000 years ago.
So even with the best intentions, focusing too much on past wrongs can solidify those grudges and maybe even spark new conflicts. That feels uncomfortable. It goes against everything we learn about history lessons. Is there ever such a thing as a duty to forget?
Well, in specific, very difficult situations, the argument is maybe yes. When collective memory basically traps communities in this cycle of perpetual pain and bitterness, the thinking goes, remembering does an injustice to the present. A really striking, though controversial example is the Pacto del Olvido, the Pact of Forgetting, in Spain after Franco died in the 70s.
The Pact of Forgetting. What was that exactly?
It was basically an unofficial political deal, both the right and the left agreed to mostly. Set aside the atrocities of the Civil War and the Franco dictatorship to focus on building a stable democracy. It meant practical things like renaming streets with royal names instead of Republican heroes and passing an amnesty law. Now, obviously, it was controversial. Some felt justice was completely sacrificed.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but many others saw it as absolutely essential for peace at that moment. It kind of demonstrated that old saying, nothing dries quicker than blood. It was this very pragmatic choice, peace now, over endlessly litigating the past, a deliberate decision to try and look forward.
Okay, so if remembering can be weaponized and resentment is like this smoldering fire, how do we actually move towards peace? What practical tools does Galtung give us, beyond just understanding the diagnosis?
Well, Galtung developed what he called the transcend method, and it builds directly on that medical DPT framework we talked about. It generally involves 3 phases. First, you identify the goals of all the parties involved. Crucially, you have to try and distinguish between their legitimate goals and maybe illegitimate ones.
Okay, understand everyone's aims.
Right. Second, you find the contradiction. That's the C in his ABC triangle: attitudes, behavior, contradiction. Attitudes are the feelings, behavior is the action, but the contradiction is the deep underlying clash of goals that's really driving things. Simple views often just miss this fundamental incompatibility.
Finding the real root of the problem.
Exactly. And third, and this is the really key part, you try to bridge or transcend that incompatibility between the legitimate goals. You need creative, empathetic, nonviolent, and importantly, lasting solutions that everyone involved can actually accept. It's about finding a whole new path, not just splitting the difference. And Galtung really hammered home the importance of thoroughly and inclusively mapping the conflict. You have to involve everyone, even groups you might consider enemies. He criticized, for example, how the international community handled the Syrian conflict at times. He identified something like 7 distinct underlying conflicts going on simultaneously.
Wow.
Yeah, and argued that all the major players, internal factions like Alawis, Sunnis, Kurds, plus external powers like Israel, the US, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the UN, all needed to be part of the process because they all have goals. Excluding major players, whether it was Iran at one point or even ISIS at another, basically dooms the process from the start because their legitimate concerns, if any, aren't addressed. You have to understand all the perspectives.
So it's about creativity, inclusivity, really understanding the whole complex map. This idea of transcendence, though, finding a solution beyond just winning or compromise. It sounds almost, well, utopian, especially in a world that often feels very zero-sum. Are there real examples where this actually happened, or is it more of an ideal we should aim for?
That's a fair question. It's definitely challenging. Galtung himself laid out 5 possible outcomes for any conflict in his 5-er scheme. You've got the obvious ones: victory for side A, defeat for B, or the reverse: defeat for A, victory for B. Then there's withdrawal, where the parties just separate, and compromise, where everyone gives up something.
The usual outcomes.
Right. But Galtung's ideal, the 5th one, is transcendence. This means finding a totally new perspective, something that goes beyond the original fight and creates a solution that meets the deeper needs of everyone involved. It often requires thinking way outside the box, maybe even redefining what the goals were in the first place. He gave some examples. For that long-running Ecuador-Peru border dispute, he proposed creating a binational zone with a natural park.
Turning disputed land into a shared resource.
Exactly. A truly transcendent solution. It transformed a source of conflict into shared benefit and environmental protection. Or for the clash between freedom of expression and freedom to insult, especially around religion, he suggested carefully distinguishing between the secular political sphere and the sacred religious sphere. Allow freedom in politics, but insist on respect for the sacred.
Interesting distinction.
And for Syria, he proposed what he called a Swiss solution. A federal system with significant local autonomy, maybe down to the village level, politically non-aligned, with international peacekeepers, and using compulsory arbitration for tough issues like the Golan Heights. These aren't just compromises. They're creative attempts to meet deeper needs, not just achieve victory.
That vision of transcendence really does sound like the ultimate goal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Does this connect at all to how diplomacy actually works in the real world? Especially maybe the stuff that happens outside the big formal meetings.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It aligns perfectly with the ideas of Track 1.5 and Track 2 diplomacy. These work alongside the traditional Track 1 stuff.
Okay, break those down for me. Track 1, 1.52.
Sure. So Track 1 diplomacy is what we usually think of the official government-to-government talks. Heads of state, ambassadors, formal treaties, the high-level stuff.
Got it.
Track 2 diplomacy, on the other hand, is completely informal. It involves non-state actors, think academics, NGOs, religious leaders, respected community figures, people who can operate outside the official spotlight. Their focus is often on building relationships, trying to shift perceptions, tackling those root social, cultural, psychological issues, the resentments, the historical memories we talked about that often get ignored in formal talks.
So Track 2 is more about the groundwork, the human level.
Exactly. And then Track 1.5 diplomacy kind of bridges the two. It brings mid-level government officials, maybe not the top decision makers, but people with influence, into informal dialogues with these civil society groups from Track 2. And these different tracks are crucial because they work together. They create space for more innovative problem solving away from the rigid protocols of official meetings. They allow people to actually build trust. They can address those deeper social issues, the historical baggage, and importantly, they can keep channels open, even when the formal track one talks completely break down.
So they keep communication flowing even when governments aren't talking.
Precisely. And that directly mirrors Galtung's emphasis on broad dialogue and finding solutions that tackle those underlying contradictions at multiple levels.
Okay, so Galtung gives us these practical steps, this vision for transcendence, links to diplomacy. But he also tried to pull it all together, right, into
Yeah.
a kind of grand theory, a peace formula. How did he synthesize all this?
He did. He actually developed a kind of peace equation. Now, it's not a strict mathematical formula you can just plug numbers into, but it's a powerful mental model, a way to visualize the forces involved. Peace, equity x harmony, trauma x conflict.
Okay, equity times harmony, divided by trauma times conflict. Walk me through that.
Sure, think of it like a recipe or a compass for building real peace. It highlights 4 essential jobs. You need cooperation, you need togetherness, you need trauma conciliation, and you need conflict solution. So for peace to really grow, you need to maximize the top parts of the fraction. Equity, which means justice, fair opportunities for everyone, and harmony, which means cooperation, mutual understanding, positive relationships. These build what Galtung called positive peace, the presence of good things, not just the absence of war.
Right, peace as more than just no fighting.
Exactly. And at the same time, you need to minimize the bottom parts. Trauma, the emotional wounds left by past violence and conflict, the current clashes over incompatible goals. Tackling these contributes to negative peace, basically stopping the direct violence. This formula really ties together everything we've discussed. You have to deal with the deep-seated traumas and conflicts, yes, but you also have to actively build equity and harmony. Move beyond just stopping the bombs to creating something genuinely lasting and positive. And he applied this thinking practically. For instance, looking at East Asia, he argued they needed a strategy beyond just military deterrence, which he saw as inherently unstable. He proposed a 6-member Northeast Asian community, something like the EU or ASEAN, to really foster dialogue, build economic ties, reduce tensions. He stressed the need for purely defensive defense strategies, postures that couldn't be seen as offensive, and greater independence from big external powers. More local decision-making, non-offensive stances, maybe like Switzerland's neutrality,
So moving away from power politics.
towards cooperation and mutual benefit, building that positive peace.
That is a truly comprehensive vision. It really shows how deep theory can actually point towards practical ways forward. So what's the final takeaway for us, for the listener, as we process all this and think about global conflicts?
I think Galtung's ultimate message, his challenge to all of us really, is to shift our focus. Stop only asking how many were killed today or who's winning. He urged us to dig deeper. Ask, what is this conflict really about? And maybe most importantly, what are the possible solutions? He wasn't just about analysis. He really pushed people, produced those ideas. It's a call for proactive, creative, solution-focused thinking for everyone, not just diplomats.
What an incredible deep dive. So much to think about there, going way beyond the surface level of conflict. For you, the listener, maybe the next time you hear about an international dispute, try asking some of these questions. What hidden forms of violence, structural or cultural, might be at play underneath? Could resentment be a silent factor, just eating away at trust? And maybe ponder this. Could a duty to forget, in some specific cases, or a multi-track diplomatic approach offer pathways to genuine transcendence, moving beyond just stalemate or compromise? Definitely something to mull over and explore on your own. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please do consider following Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a quick moment, leaving a 5-star rating really does help us reach more curious minds like yours. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive.